Okay, well, we'll get into it. So basically, the topic today is about engagement, and obviously with the use of games, and particularly in this case, card games. And so essentially, we're going to play a few different card games. Now, that's going to be difficult because obviously you're isolated at home and so forth. So it'll probably be me more demonstrating some of those games. But if you have a pack of cards, you might like to try some of these things a little bit later, and we'll play with that sort of idea. So essentially we'll be using some different cards, and I'll show you how basically card games are constructed, because there's a bit of a theme or a background in how some of these games develop and what happens, and we'll take you through that. The other thing that I'll do is try and link it to parts of the curriculum. Now, obviously, with a game, depending on how you change it or ask different questions, it could elevate it in different parts of the curriculum. So I like to use the expression that we're going to have some routines in place, and I'll explain that as we go. But essentially, a routine is something that you can do regularly, but you can make slight variations to it. And if you think about it, schools work on this notion of routines. So I'll explain in terms of a card game what a routine might look like, and then we'll link into some of the bits of the slides that I sent you before. But I just thought we'd start with a routine to begin with, and then sort of formalize that a little bit. So now we've got a bit of a visualizer here, so we're going to switch across to that. And I was going to move some of these cards off here, but essentially I'll probably use some cards that are called school-friendly cards, partly because in this case here there's less on them, and also they'll have less reflection. But most of what we do here, you could play with an ordinary set of cards, so let's not get too worried about what pack of cards it is. It doesn't really matter. So I'll explain as we go, and I'll take a very basic idea, what I'm going to call a routine. So different people in different countries call this routine by different names, but typically in Australia we would call it snap. Okay, now I want to take the idea of snap and just build it a little bit. So I'll just move this off here, and I'll show you what I mean as we play on the screen. So I'm just going to have some cards here, if you can have a look. We'll just bring that up for you. So essentially, we've just got some cards here now. Look, the bottom line is I created school-friendly cards because lots of places that I work in, cards are banned. For example, when you work up north of Australia, because of the association with gambling, they're banned. So we designed some different cards. I'm very happy that they're used in places like East Timor. I mean, I track where they sort of are. So that makes me feel pretty happy. But any set of cards will do. So let's take the basic game here. Okay, so in standard game of Snap, you'll basically have two players, maybe more, but two is typically it. And depending on your variations, a bit like Monopoly. You play Monopoly at someone's house, they'll have one set of rules, and you play at someone else's house, there'll be another set of rules. But really what we want to do is try and get some consistency. So I'm going to turn a card over, and I might have a 10 here. Okay, if the other player turns over a card and it's the same or it's a match, we get a snap. If it's not, and so forth. Now, that's a routine. Essentially, what we're talking about is once you understand how to play Snap, what the basic rules are that underline Snap, then the rest can be changed quite easily. And this allows us to do a thing called differentiation, because sometimes teachers are making different lessons as opposed to taking the same idea but working in different ways. So let's take this same idea called Snap, which people understand, and we're going to play a game called Snap, one more or one less. And so essentially we take this base game and we change the rules. So let me just show you what I mean by that. We can bring up a slide, for example, that will show that for you. And essentially you'll see here we've got the standard game of Snap. And then in this case here, if, for example, a 4 was already down on the pack and then a 5 goes down, you would snap. Now we can either call that snap one more or one less. That's a language sort of notion. Or we could talk about snap the number that comes before, or snap the number that comes after, and so forth. But once you understand Snap, you can play with it. Some children may really struggle with that. So you might play just Snap the number that comes after, or you might just play Snap the number that comes before. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of enjoyment when children play this. Now let's take this a step further. So I'll just take you back down to the image here, and I'll play this sort of thing here, and I'll show you at the moment we've got a 3 down. Imagine we played a different version of this game, and we played a game that was called Snap to 10. So essentially a 3 is down, the next player is about to turn their card over, but their anticipation would be that if I turn over a 7, well, now if we play a normal snap, I've just turned over a 3, we would snap. But in this case, we don't, because I'm looking for 7, the number that makes it to 10. And I turn over here and I've got a 4. So now what number am I looking for? I'm looking for a number that makes it to 10, and away we go. I didn't shuffle those cards terribly well, but you start to see how we had a base game called Snap, and then with Snap, we just built and built and built on that. Snap to 10 is actually a very sort of popular sort of game, so it's just one to think about. So that's one idea that I just wanted to get across, that basically when we play a game, we can look for little ways to vary it or differentiate it, and we have this notion of a routine. Okay, let's take another example, and we'll just bring it up now. And this is an example of a warm-up. So if you have a look at the slide that's coming up, it'll talk about a bingo game. Okay, now in this case here, if you're just having a look at the slide there, we're just using the digits 1 to 9. You don't need those cards. Any pack of cards would do. You would use an ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In fact, lots of schools that I visit, they have all these packs of cards with bits missing. So often I pull these bits out, I put them in one of those little Ziploc bags, and you've got a game ready to go. The colours don't matter, it can be red or black cards, and the suits don't matter. All you need is the ace to 9. Now, if we go back to the picture, I'll show you exactly how it's all set out and how it's played. And once again, it's a simple variation on a thing called bingo. So we've got, now if I was using some mathematical language, we've got a 3x3 array that's here. Arrays will have rows and they'll have columns and so forth. And in this case, I would vary the language. So for a young child, I might talk about, please turn over the number that comes just before 9, in which case they turn over the 8. Or turn over the card that is, and we've got here, so you can see the 8, that's the one we turn over. We haven't showed that very well, but you've got the idea. And you literally flip the card over. Then I might say, please turn over the card that comes just before 2, until you'd be turning over the 1, because that's the number that comes just before 2. So we're getting a proximity, a bit like a number line basically developing here. Now it's standard bingo rules. Now I don't say turn over 3 in a line because I want to build the language of mathematics. I'd say please, if you turn over 3 cards in a row, column or diagonal, then you've won that game, okay? Now, take the same game. So we're taking this same basic idea. It's a classic warm-up game, this one, because you can get it in and out and so forth. If you take the same idea now, watch how I'm going to change the language to move us up the school to a higher part of the school. Same game format though. Okay, so let's go back to the 9 cards that are sitting in our array there. And I might say, let's do the 50% game. And so I would say, turn over the card that is 50% of 12. And they turn over the 6. Turn over the card that is 50% of 14. And you turn over the 7 and so forth. Now, normally when I play that game, what I have is those same 9 cards in my hand, and I just randomly turn them over. So that's the basic idea that is sitting there. So we'd have that sort of thing. Now, later on, instead of saying, oh, turn over the card that's 50% of, we could change the language, or what I call the literacy overlay that sits on top of here. So the literacy overlay might be turn over the card that's half of, and so forth. So we can take the same game and make slight variations as we go, and suddenly it varies. For example, one of my favorite versions of that game is the GST game. And in the GST game, you're finding 10% of something and you're turning over. So the rules are very simple. It's not about the complication of that sort of thing. Because sometimes we're investing so much in the rules that we get lost as to the purpose of the game. What's the mathematics or the key point I want to get? So now I'll just pick up on 2 things, and Lena, we'll go back to the slide number 3, if that's okay, in here. I just need to just take us into a spot here. Essentially, what I'm talking about here is this is basically the big picture of the Australian curriculum, and I understand in New South Wales there are some slight differences to other states and so forth, but generally this is similar across the country. We're playing basically with cards. We're going to play in a place called number. And when we're playing in this number idea, mostly we're probably going to build a thing called fluency, or the proficiency of fluency. However, I think there's some really neat stuff in here about there's some understandings that we can build. Also, there's going to be some reasoning. So later on we'll talk about anyway, you probably won't have a chance to play the game Roko. The reason I like Roko is it's really about reasoning. It's really about thinking things through. And it's got an element of fluency and it's got understanding, but it's got that reasoning. So whenever I'm looking at a game or an idea, I'm saying, which of these boxes can I tick? Well, clearly fluency is going to be a major one, but there's a bunch of other things that I can tick. So a game like Combo, original version of that is based actually on double nine dominoes, is really where the genesis of the idea of Combo comes from. If you look at a set of double nine dominoes, and I was looking for a way that practiced addition and subtraction and multiplication and division, and that game had it all. And so that's why I chose it. Since then, we've added about 4 or 5 different variations with the same cards, and they would focus on different bits of fluency. Let's look at a different game. And the reason I want to look at this game, it's the 7-card game that we're just going to look at now. Okay, now it's pretty boring with the name 7-card game, so if you want to come up with a different version of it, but the 7-card game says it all. Essentially, you deal 7 cards to each player. Now, the purpose of this game is whoever's got the highest total will win. Now, that doesn't sound all that exciting, so let me expand a little bit on how this game develops, okay? So I deal 7 cards to each player, and essentially I say, look, this is not about speed, this is just about working out what our totals are. So for example, if you have a look at the slide here, we've got the 7 cards, and they're 6 and 8 and 3 and so forth, and that's all well and good. But actually, if I give the children a bit of time to rearrange things, they can use a strategy of adding to 10 or make to 10, build to 10, whatever version of that description you might use. So if we group the 6 and the 4, I've got a 10, and a 7 and 3, I've got a 10, and 8 and 2's got 10. So clearly now my total is 35 because I've got 3 10s. So inside the game is some of the mathematics that's coming from it. Now, and a lot of this is about luck because the next player may have just had a better set of cards. So it's not always the smartest child who wins, okay? It's about working out the total. But what I'd like to do is just show you an idea, and I'll get you to look down at the visualizer at this point here, and I'll show you with the cards what I mean, okay? A lot of games, when you win some points, so imagine I won that round, okay? When you win some points, I just get a point or so, and then when you play so many rounds, I might be so far ahead of everybody else that they just give up. They lose the engagement. They lose the enthusiasm for the game. So I just want to give you a point scoring system that may or may not be useful. I call it the drum roll system. So essentially, imagine I won that and I get the kids, we got to do a drum roll, okay? Because how many points did I win? Well, I turn over the top card of the deck, and in this case, I won 2 points. So I'm not that far ahead. So the child who's sort of behind says, whoa, I could turn over 10 points at some point. And so they're still in the game because they have the opportunity to turn something. They love the drum roll sort of thing. You see that happen in that. So even in the way that you structure a game, the point scoring system can help with your engagement. Because as I said, once you're way behind, then there's an issue. So it's not just about having the fun, it's how we build it in. And some kids, they've lost 7 in a row, but they could still win. And as I said, this is random. There's no real strategy other than the way you add the cards that come here. So that's just a different variation on a thing. I also want to just talk a little bit about how card games are structured. So if we go back to the first game that we played, which is basically Snap. If you really think about Snap, Snap is about matching, and it's really about matching one thing with 3 others. So let me demonstrate for you, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so we'll just put it down on the visualizer here, and I'm going to put a card here. So essentially with Snap, if you think about it, I've got a 6, okay, in this point here. Now, I would snap if that card matches. So lots of card games are about matching. Essentially games like Rummy, where you build a book of 4, are really about matching. So in this case here, you might notice here that there are different ways that I can match the 6, and there'd be one more. So if I was playing a bit of a game here, it would be about finding those matches that would happen. So here's, I found the fourth match for you. So I just want you to bear in mind. So there was my original 6, and now there's one match, there's another match, and there's another match. And so now what I want to do is teach you the basis of a game that's called Pop. Some people may have come across Pop, but Pop, if you really want to think about it, is about a slow snap. So I'll just explain it to you a little bit more. So basically, many card games are about one thing and 3 matches. Okay, so this game Pop that we're going to play is about one thing and 3 matches, and we can build it. So once you understand how it works, then it'll all make sense. So I'm going to use some homemade cards here, and particularly we're going to use money as an example. So I'm just going to take this off here, and I'll show you what a set of Pop might look like. Okay, so you're welcome to whiz in our website. Look, there's about, I don't know, 40 of these games that sit there, but I need to give you the structure of how it works. So the game's called Pop because they've got a bursting balloon card in it. And I've designed this so you can put it on a photocopier with the cardboard in a photocopier. Within 2 sheets, you'll see there's one and there's another one. Within those 2 sheets are all the cards you need to play a game. And there are 24 cards. All right, so that's step 1. The reason I use 24 cards is so that if I have 3 players, they get 8 cards each. And if I have 4 players, they get 6 cards each. Everyone gets the same number of cards. All right, that's step 1. Then what you do is cut these out. And you'll notice in this case, there is, I'll just go to the 10-cent piece here. There's a 10 cent, matches with the word 10 cent, matches with the 10 cents in terms of symbols, and matches with the image. So it's the same as we had before. The 6 went with the 6, went with the 6, went with the 6. And if we get this principle, you can play any of this sort of game. So I've made some earlier, we'll talk about, and I'll give you an example. So I've just glued some onto some standard blank cards. By the way, a little tip, I've numbered all of my cards. So if you'll see on the back, if we just have a bit of a look, I'll show you. Here's a tip if you make this stuff up. So I've numbered all the backs 9, so I know this makes my full setup later on. If you've ever sorted cards, you'll appreciate that tip. Okay, so in this game here, it works this way. It's a slow version of Snap. So just a reminder, there was my 10-cent coin. We're making this nice and simple. So at year 1, we need to recognize coins. That's what our curriculum says. So that 10 cents is going to match with that 10 cents, which will match with that 10 cents, which matches with that 10 cents. All right, so that's how they go together. Now, I said this is a slow snap because they're just building up this idea. So imagine we've got 4 players and we've got them set at a different point here. So there's a player here, here's one here, here's one here, here's one here. They've got some other cards, okay? So they would have been dealt 6 cards all together that sit here. Now, normally when I do this, I also use a scoring board. And the board I would use would be a 10 frame. So each player, I haven't got enough room here, so just imagine we've got, each player would have a 10 frame in front of them, and then they would have some counters. So when you get a pop, okay, I'll put some counters in the middle, okay? When you get a pop, all right, pop means you pick up a counter. That's essentially what this is. So I'll run through the rules with you. Each player has some cards in their hand, so they've got them like this, okay? So there's our cards that's sitting here, and then basically, the player to the left always goes first in a card game. We've got to teach about clockwise and anti-clockwise and all of those sort of things. But once we get that right, then this is the routine. And the way Pop works is this. If you can match, you must match. And that's the only rule that you have. So let's go back to the visualizer and you'll see what I mean as we play this card. Okay, so I'm the player to the left of the dealer and I say I'm going to play 10 cents. Normally, that player would play 10 cents. The next bit would happen, this player here, they're holding a 10 cent in their hand and the rules are if you can match, you must match. So out comes the 10 cents. But of course, if you get a match, in this case here, when we get a match, we get a pop. And so that player on their 10 frame would win a point and get a pop. I love that idea of getting that point. And we start to keep track of the score. Now, this player here has their own 10 frame, but I'm just going to move this one around a little bit. Okay, this player here is getting really excited because they're also holding a 10 cent. When they play out that, they don't just go pop, they go pop, pop, because this person popped.
Excuse me. Sorry. Does that also apply for a 20 or a 50 cent?
No, it only's got to be exact same match.
What if they're all 50?
Okay, if you've only got, oh yeah, so if this person started with 50 cents, we got a match by the player on the left. So this, say I've got a 20 cent here. If this player started with 20 cents and this player here has 20 cents, they play it and they go pop. And if this player's got 20 cents, they go pop, pop, because it's the second pop in there. Now we're aiming for the biggie, the triple pop. If the next player also had 20 cents, can you see there? I get the triple pop. Now, this is where the pop card becomes pretty important. If you're holding that wild card for a pop, you couldn't play that out. So remember when I showed you the sheet of, I'll just bring it here. See, it's got like in here, it's got like the little wild card with the bursting balloon. That one can be any card. And in that case there, if I play that one, I could get the big quadruple pop. And kids love the idea of getting the big quadruple pop. There's little dances they do, all sorts of things that happen. Every time I get a pop, I basically add to my score. However, if I can't match, because really all these games are about matching, if I can't match, I just play a different card. So in this case here, I can't match the 20 cents. I can play 50 cents, but there's no pop. This now becomes the card that the next player has to pop on. So in this case here, this player is looking for 50 cents because you match by the previous card. Now, I taught this in a school in a low socioeconomic area, and they wrote an article up, and I've got a picture of it. At the end of term, they ran what they called the Great Pop-Off, and there's all these kids in the library playing versions of this game. Because as you can imagine, you don't have to stick to money. We could have time. We could have fractions. We could have letters of the alphabet, like the capital letter A and the lowercase a. It's one game format. And it's based on a notion of a slow snap. So if you think about it, it's the slow idea of snap. So it's not necessarily about fluency. By the way, those same cards could be used for snap, if you think about it, because snap is one thing and 3 matches. Rummy games are one thing and 3 matches. So essentially, they build that sort of idea. So that was really a very short version of pop. I've made a video about that. I'll probably make an even simpler one. Sometimes I just play pop with colours. So my granddaughter is 5, so we would start with like colours first, and a red pops with a red, and a green pops with green. Now, if you think about it, so we've got one here with money. And you notice in the example I showed you, it actually had the word 20 cents, and it had 20 cents with the numeral. So I just go back to the sheet we had, and I'll put it back on the visualizer for you. Okay, so that version of pop, you'll see here it's got image of 10 cents. It's then got the word 10 cents. It's got 10 cents with the symbol and the image. They're the 4 that would pop each other. So some children in your class, if you think about it, some children might just be playing that first version just with all the images because they're building that idea. But some children in another little group could be playing the next level up, which is, well, we're going to match with the word. We're going to match with the symbol. Now, at year 2 level, what happens is it's no longer just recognizing coins, but at year 2, we count coins. So we make a little alteration to the game there, and a 20 cent would match with 2 10-cent pieces. So you start to see how you can make slight variations, and that's how we can work with, say, mixed level groups. So, for example, a few months ago when we were allowed to sort of visit in schools, I worked with a teacher, and she was working with children in year 3, 4, 5, and 6 in the same class. It was a small rural school. And for her, what she had to do was have similar ideas, but run them at different levels. And that's the key to this thing called differentiation, really, sitting here. Because we're going to get back to this notion of engagement. Once a game gets too simple and there's no challenge in it, kids start to lose interest. Likewise, if you pitch a game too high for them, they'll lose interest as well. So it's about this notion of engagement is the big deal here, that you've got to pitch the game at the right point. I'll give you an example. Once you know how to not lose in, the tic-tac-toe or the noughts and crosses, we know how not to lose. You lose a lot of enthusiasm for that game. Or there are certain other games, NIM games in mathematics would be an example. Once you learn the strategy to not to lose, it takes a bit of the challenge out of it, and kids lose a bit of enthusiasm or a bit of engagement. That's it there. So let's talk about a couple of others. We probably should talk about row-con combo because they're the ones that I was asked to speak about in some detail, but I just wanted you to get a notion of what we can do with games. So let's look at the game Roco, and I'll explain a little bit where it comes from and how it's developed and so forth, and why it looks like it looks and so on. Essentially, there are many versions that you could have of this game. In fact, when I first wrote about it, we've got a game that uses less cards and so forth, but sometimes you've got to be pragmatic. So you might notice on the slide that there's a 7x7 array. So there's that word array coming up again. So we've got 7 rows and 7 columns, and we have 49 cards. Now that's not fluke, because I used to handwrite these cards on blank cards. That's how they originally were. And after a while, you get sick of handwriting this, and I have groups when I was teaching them handwriting on it and so forth. Now, the reason we went with that many cards is when you buy blank cards, there's 52 or 54 in a pack. And when you get cards printed like I have there, they come in a standard pack of between 52 and 54. So 49 cards works really well by the time you put rules in and so forth. Having said that, what teachers really love is when you put that pack out, you know you've got all the cards, because when you do your 7x7 array, you know you've got 49 cards that are sitting there. The other card, if we go back to the slide, the key card in this whole thing is the black one. And I'll talk a little bit back, it's down the bottom right-hand side. The game is called Roco, and some people ask me why it's called that. Simply because it's about rows, that's the row bit, and columns. And so one of the things I wanted to get across to children is rows always go across and columns always go down. So the first time when we made this set of cards, it just had a little X where that black card is. We eventually made it into the word rows and columns, and that's where Roco came from. Now, just for it's a side point, but I think you'll find it interesting. When you get a pack of cards printed, to make it economical, you need to get 3,000 packs made up. And I wanted them in 2 colours. And I need to explain why I like packs of cards come in 2 colours. I don't know if you've ever sorted out cards, but it's a nightmare. So I have a bit of a rule. Those Roco cards come in a red pack or a blue pack, and I never put the 2 cards next to each other on desks. So basically, I don't put 2 red packs next to each other. I put a red pack and a blue pack. So at the end of the game, the reds go back in the red pack and the blues go back in the blue, and I'm not sorting cards out. It's a bit like I numbered those other cards because it's a lot of work. So that means I had to get 6,000 packs made up. And here's a message about proofreading. When the cards came to me, they came from Taiwan, and I opened a pack up. If you look at the black card, so we'll bring that back up on the screen for you. Okay. If you look at the black card there, the cards that came had written on them row and olum. They'd left off the C. So there are a bunch of kids across Australia totally mixed up because they think there's rows and olums rather than rows and columns. We actually got all those cards replaced, but it's a lot of work putting them all in. But a good message about proofreading. Now, basically, every time you play the game, it's different, because when you put the cards out on the table, they're going to form in a different spot. And where the cards fall is where they fall. So don't think that the black card has to be in the bottom right-hand corner. It could be anywhere. But for the purpose of what I'm about to demonstrate to you, it's going to be there. But every time we put them out, they'll be different. So we'll go back to the slide, and I'll just talk you through a little bit. Now, the other thing is this, as you can imagine, this card game takes up what I call a lot of desk real estate. And so I always play with 2 versus 2. So a pair of children playing a pair. What that does, it reduces in your class from a class of 32 down to basically a class of 8, because you're working with 8 groups. That's it. And a pair plays a pair because I want them to discuss the moves that they're going to play. So essentially it goes this way. There's an advantage going first. So, you know, you roll the dice or whatever system you want to do, who is the latest birthday or whatever it is, to work out which pair goes first, because there is an advantage going first. When you go first, you get to choose whether you're going to be the row player or the column player. Now, you'd be pretty silly to go with rows in this one here, because every card in that the bottom row is negative. we're going backwards if we get that one. And when I'm teaching about that, I use a number line and I talk to the children about we're going forwards or we're going backwards and so forth. At secondary school, they use some different language. So I would say we're going to be the column player. Once you choose to be the column player for a game, your team or your pair is stuck at being the column player. You're only going to be in columns. Now, from that point on, the other team are the row players. So let me give you an example. The aim of the game is to pick up cards to get the largest total. So I'm looking here and I think, whoa, I'm in this far right-hand column, and I think the biggest number I can spot there is the 6 right at the top. We can see that 6 there. And if I'm a novice player, that's all well and good. I'm going to go and grab that 6. So now that 6 that gets taken off, and that becomes my card for my score. And the row column card goes into that spot. Now look what I've just given access to, because the next team, they have to be the row player because I've chosen to be the column player. And if you look at what's in that row, there's lots of really good numbers, but boy, the one I'm going to pick is 12. So maybe I should have thought a little bit before I made my move. And it doesn't take long before children realize there's a strategy to this game. Maybe it would have been better to choose maybe the 4 in this row. So instead of that 6, because look, then I'd only give them access to a 6. Maybe it would have been better to choose a 2 in that column, because that only gives you an access to 3. Now can you see there's lots of thinking? This is what the reasoning part of the game is. It's all well and good. We're going to add some numbers and we're going to subtract some numbers, and that's nice. That's fluency. But what I'm really aiming for here is this top end of our curriculum, this reasoning, this thinking that's going on. Now, the first few times children play, they're not going to think about that. They're just going to be about, let's get the highest total we can. After a while, particularly when you work in pairs, they'll say, oh, no, I think that move's better. And they'll be thinking 1 or 2 moves ahead. And that's this strategic thinking that's going on in their head. So essentially, ROCO is really about rows and columns and numbers that sit in there. Some people ask me, oh, why have you got the negatives and whatnot? You could almost have any set of numbers in that, and you could play with ordinary cards. The key part to me is about rows and columns and strategy. By putting in that the -7 and so forth and the 12, children get very fixated. I've got to get the 12. But sometimes in their haste to get the 12, they're missing other really important moves. So it's the strategy that I like. But you could play that in different ways. Now, to give you an idea, I've seen people play that anywhere from year 3, and I've got some Australian curriculum links there for you. But there's a lot of high schools play this game. And the reason they're playing this game is they start doing a thing called integers. And so they're justifying at that. So be aware that how you play the game and what you emphasize could change where you are in the curriculum. Okay? If we just take you through a little bit further, I want to make a couple of other comments. And we'll take you down to 3 variations of ROCO. We've got strategy and then we've got some bits. So we'll just take you down to this bit here. In the standard game, really one of your strategies is I want to give away the least difference. And that's why sometimes I might choose a lower card because I'm giving less away. However, after a while, the challenge might go from that game, because if you get very good at it and your opponents aren't quite as strong, the challenge goes and maybe some of the engagement goes. So I like to change the rules a little bit. So for example, if you suddenly turn the game on its head and you say, well, actually today to win, we're aiming for the lowest total, then children really, the 12, well, I don't want the 12. That's a bad thing. I'm actually really looking for the -7. So just bear in mind that you can re-engage kids. You can build up their appreciation for the game by changing the rules a little bit. And not every pair of students has to play the same version of the game in the same room. That's how we can differentiate as well. The hardest version of that game is when you say, we're actually looking for the pair, the 2 players, that get their total at the end closest to 0. So that means I've got to chip, chop and change, because I've got to be keeping a running total of what's happening. So even the way you score in that game, I play 2 versions of scoring. One is where both groups have to leave their cards face up that they've scored. So I can be calculating their score and looking at my score. And if you do that, there is another strategy you can get out of this game, and that is the end of the game occurs when your card ends up in a row or column where there's no more cards. That's the end of the game. Now, if you think about that, if I'm keeping track of what your score is, then I can force, if I have the opportunity, I can force the end of the game. So there's another way of making it. If you, however, have them and they have their cards face down so you can't see, so you don't have that opportunity, then that changes the game again. So once again, I look for opportunities and we might play the game a bit like kids' toys. I play a game a bit, I get the kids, the rules going very well. Then we give it a bit of a rest. I put it away, bring it back later. Then maybe I make a little change to the rules and so forth. And that keeps the engagement or the life up a little bit. Okay, so that's basically Roco. We've put there's a video up if you wanted to see it and so forth. And then I thought we better talk about Combo. And it's very interesting. Depends what people want to get out of games. Sometimes I personally like Roco more. That's just me, okay? Because I like that challenge and I like the strategy. But if you ask, for example, parents, they like Combo more because they can see the fluency side of it. And that keeps coming back to these proficiency strands that we have in our curriculum. I really want to get our kids to reasoning. I mean, hopefully one of these kids is going to have vaccines to various things in the future. We need some really good thinking, okay? But we still need to have some fluency. So let's talk Combo a little bit, and we'll bring a little slide up about that, etc. Originally, when Combo was designed, as I said, it was based on double nine dominoes, essentially. That's where the idea comes from. And I was looking for ways of being able to do some basic number facts. And what you may notice when you start teaching children is when you start doing things like the tables, and I need to make a comment here, our curriculum does not say teach tables, it says teach multiplication facts and related division facts. So I'm always looking for something that links those sort of things here. But when they start learning that, often their addition subtraction sort of goes down a little bit. And so I was looking for a game that combined all of those ideas. And so roughly, I think this game fits, depending on how good your kids are, from about year 4 onwards, because they need to know some of these facts. But since we developed that, we've actually come up with 4 other games using the same cards, because if you're going to invest and buy cards, you want to get the maximum out of it in a sense. So what we've done is made a bunch of videos, but I'll just give you a very brief overview on the visualizer. And then there's a whole pile of videos, and we've put up some extra rule cards. A small comment, I don't know what schools are doing over in New South Wales at the moment, but our schools are making packs of little packs of things to send home for parents. And quite a few schools have contacted me and talked about this. What they're doing is getting the children to make videos of these games and that they use on their internet that parents can look at. And I think when children describe the rules, essentially what you're doing is a procedural text, which fits nicely with your language program. But when the children are making the videos, they're using digital things. They're really explaining the rules and talking about all the variations. So maybe in schools, they might like to think about making their own videos, which I think would be better than watching me, that's for certain. Anyway, let's have a look and I'll give you the basic idea that sits in here. Now, essentially, with a game like Combo, every player gets dealt 5 cards, okay? And once again, there's a skill there about dealing. There's a thing about we deal to the player to the left first, you deal to yourself last, all of that sort of stuff. A basic rule is you don't pick your cards up till they're all dealt, and that's the thing. And we need to give a bit of time for them to sort their cards. But let's imagine now, let's play a couple of options here. I'm going to put some cards face up so it becomes fairly obvious here. And look, normally you'd have 5, this player would have 5 cards, but I just want to put 2 here. Okay, the remaining pack sits off to this side here, and I've dealt this card. Now, the reason this game's called Combo is because we can combine the digits that are on this card in different ways to make different totals. So, for example, here, I could say 8 and 4 is 12, and I really like the kids to verbalize when they're doing this. So they're explaining what it is that they're doing. So I would have them say 8 and 4 is 12, because if they say 8 and 4 is 13, I can fix that problem before it develops a little bit. So the verbalization is a big deal. And when they studied, Curtin University did a study on the game Numero, which you may have come across, and they found there were far more games when children verbalized the moves than if they played silently. So I like to get that talking and discussion going. So let's go back to the visualizer and I'll explain how this then works. Okay, so everyone's been dealt 5 cards, you turn one up and then the pack's sitting in the middle. My job is to take that card and somehow match it. See, all these games are about matching. I could say 8 and 4 is 12 and look for a match for that. I could say 8 take 4 is 4, or the difference between 8 and 4 is 4. All that sort of thing is sitting there. It depends on what language you wanted to use. I could say 8 fours are 32, and when the division works nicely, I can do, you know, how many 4s in 8? There's 2, or 8 divided by 4 is 2. So in other words, that card could represent any of 4 different values. Then what I need to do is scan through my own set of cards and see if I can match it. I found 2 possibilities here. Okay, so in this case here, I could say 8 take 4 is 4, and I could say 6 take 2 is 4, and place that on top, and that becomes the new card. However, you don't have to use the same operation to do it. I could say 8 divided by 4 is 2, and 7 take 5 is 2, and put that one out. I need to make sure that the combination I use, the total is the same. Now, I often, when I teach this, play with the cards face up, and the next person have their cards face up, and so forth. Because when you play face up, you can help. You can be a bit more helpful, you can assist and so forth. However, I've noticed some competitive children actually make their choice on which card to put out, depending on what they see in another person's hand. So that's actually using a fair bit of strategy and thinking. So I like to play cards face down on the table just to get it all going, and it works very well cooperatively sitting in. But later on, you can play your cards in your hand. Now, there's one extra rule I need to talk about here, so I'll head back into the card set here. Imagine in my hand, I didn't have some nice cards here. I didn't have any that I could match, okay? Well, essentially, if I can't go, imagine I couldn't go with those ones, I have to pick up off the pack, and that goes in, oh, I picked up the blank one. Let's pick up a different one. There we go. I picked that one up. Now, it just so happens that that one would match, because I could say 8 divided by 4 is 2. 3 take 1 is 2, but I can't use it because I've had my turn. I have to wait, but this player might use it because I took off here. That's my turn finished. Now, basically, I like simple rules. So the simple rule is this. When you get rid of all your cards, that's the end of the game. And some teachers add an extra version where if someone's on 1 card, you've got to knock the table, and that's the way of indicating that I'm close to finishing and so forth. So you can start sort of breathing new life into games in different ways. But clearly, I'm not going to give that game to a year 1 because it doesn't fit. They don't have the level of fluency that's required to play that game. And so I call it the Goldilocks principle. And the Goldilocks principle goes like this. Really nice game, but fitting in the wrong spot. So just because I've got a game doesn't have to matter. See, with Goldilocks, it was too hot, it was too cold, it was then just right. So sometimes we might have this favorite game that we really love, but it just doesn't quite fit in this point here. So we need to be aware of that. So what we've done is, and we'll just show you a couple of examples, we've now taken the same set of cards and talked about a variety of different ways you can do it. So for example, this same set of cards, and you know, you can look at the videos later on and so forth, is just about, you start with 4 cards in the middle. My hand is covering it a little bit there, but you might be able to see it on the sheet. But essentially, we've got 4 cards in the middle, and then players take turns. And what they're doing there is they're taking turns to, the video looks like it's coming up. See there we go. We'll stop it there. Okay. And we can see there's cards set up in the middle, 4 cards, and players take turns to just do the addition stuff. So the top card there is 4 and 3, so that's 7. The card I might put down is a 6, we've already got a 6 and a 2, so I can't put that one down. Might be a 4 and a 2. So where that 4-3 card is, to the left of it, I'd put a 4 and a 2 card, because 4 and 3, 7. The number that's 1 less than that is 6, and 4 and 2, 6. And so basically, that's a simple game just with addition. So it's just looking at that sort of idea. So, if you've got the set of cards, you want to get the maximum use out. Schools don't have unlimited budgets, so we need to give them the maximum value for what they have. So essentially what we've done is just put together 4 other games using the same pack of cards. And say, for example, you had a split year level. So remember I mentioned earlier, we had maybe year 2, year 3, year 4. Your year 2s might be playing in one spot, and your year 3s might be playing a slightly different version, and so forth. So we'll have a look at the next game, which is Total 20. I really like Total 20. It's sort of my new favourite game that's sitting here. And essentially with Total 20, in a pack of combo cards, there are 45 numbered cards that we have. And all we do is we lay them out in a, here's that word array again, 3 rows of 5. So what you'll see on the screen now is 15 cards laid out. Then essentially you keep piling on top of them till you get 3 high. So basically 3 rows of 5 that are 3 cards high. That uses all 45 cards. Now, the name of this game, as the suggestion is Total 20. So I'm looking for pairs of cards that will give me a total of 20. Now, we've noticed since children have been isolated at home and parents are trying to find things to do with them, they really like a solo or a patience sort of game. And in this game here, if you keep picking up your cards that add to 20, so pairs of cards that add to 20, you will use 22 cards up, or 22 pairs. That's 44 cards. Do you know you'll be left with 1 left? And if you've done it correctly, it'll add to 10. So the game's total 20, but if you do that one correctly, the card at the end might be a 6 and a 4, but it doesn't have to be. It might be a 7 and a 3, but if the last card does not add to 10, you've made a mistake somewhere through it. So it's a bit like self-checking. That's why I quite like it. I like the column, the rows, etc. But if you really want the hard version of that game, there's a variation called Total 18, which is actually harder than Total 20 because they're so used to looking at those sort of numbers and so forth. Anyway, so I just wanted to give you that bit of background to games and so forth. Earlier we mentioned Pop. There's a picture of all the different Pops you can grab and play. Once you understand how to play one game, you can play them all. That's the essential message I wanted to give. There'll be stuff on fractions. There'll be stuff on all sorts of things. Some of these games were developed by some of the teachers in the Tiwi Islands up north. The other thing, look, if it's useful to you, I know the word free always appeals to student teachers in particular. So we've got a bunch of free games. In fact, in there's the book, some books I wrote back in 1990. So we just put them up free for people if they want to grab them and so forth. And we have some planning materials. So look, hopefully it's a bit difficult to teach you a card game without the cards and all of that sort of thing, but hopefully there'll be useful information for you and so forth. So I better pass back to the boss, so to speak.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for explaining so many games in such a short amount of time so that we can engage our students. I particularly liked how you mentioned the differentiation because I find that our students always want to really know how can we apply it to different stages, and just doing those slight variations that you mentioned is going to be fantastic. And all your teaching tips as well, and those free resources we're definitely going to utilize. So we had a couple of questions in the chat box. One of the students wanted to know if they get access to the presentation, so the PowerPoint, so they're keen to have access to that. So
I think we've sent it across.
Yeah,
I'm pretty certain.
Yeah, you sent it across to me, so I'll definitely make that available to them, and also students that are keen to order cards as well.
Okay, a couple of things. I'm not here to make money off students, so I'll make a couple of comments to you.
Okay.
I'm happy to send you the books across for your library, as I mentioned before.
Yep.
You may or may not have some, I don't know how many cards you've got there.
Yeah.
The real expense of sending cards anywhere is Australia Post. So I'm happy, when we can meet again and so forth, I'm happy to send you some for students, and we'll work out something there because it'd be one lot of postage. The expense is sending them. It probably costs you, a pack of cards normally is about $4 something. I could certainly make it cheaper for you guys, but it actually cost me $9 to post 2 packs across. So it's easier to send like a big lot, and then we save money. I don't want to waste people's money. I'm also, should be enough stuff there anyway that you can play a lot of this without specialist cards. But yeah, I know students haven't got much money, they haven't got part-time work at the moment. So, yeah,
That's
I'll
very,
work out something for you. Yeah.
What you
thank
can do is order as a bulk for the School of Education in Sydney, and then if any students interested, then we'll just look at ways of dividing that up so everyone can have the opportunity to access those resources and use it on Prax as well.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
The question is a little bit more about parents. Parents potentially asking our pre-service teachers or asking school teachers about playing games with their children at home. And I wonder, how often do you play these card games? If you were a parent thinking back about being able to use these resources, is it like a once a day, once a week? How frequent would you play these games?
Okay, there's a couple of, it's very interesting. Obviously, since we've had lockdown, parents are finding or reinventing or sometimes learning some of these games again. I'll give you an example. I work in a diverse range of places. So I work in a school where there's 47 languages spoken in the school. And when I work with what we would call it kindy pre-primary, you know, before you start the formal year of school. When I speak with the parents there are 8 translators in the room as I speak, and one of them is translating 2 languages. So there's 10 separate languages going there. And I taught them a very simple card game called Fish. I don't know if you know how Fish works, but essentially you've got a set of cards in your hand, and you say, have you got a 7 or something, and they give it to you, and so forth. And the thing is, if they don't have it, you say, go fish. Can I tell you, that game was so popular with those parents because, one, they felt they could help their children because their second or third language is English, and so they're trying to help their children. So a simple game like that, particularly in that environment, was perfect. I think sometimes too, what's the best way of me describing it? I think at the other end, some of our children can be so stressed by some of the homework, which, to be frank with you, is often busy work, as opposed to what I think might be useful and interesting. They get so stressed by it. Why wouldn't you just play a game for 10 or 15 minutes? I'm not saying take up your whole evening with doing this sort of thing, but you know, like most parents are very happy to read a children's book, you know, sit with a child, read the book to them, and that's a pleasant experience for them. Likewise, you play a simple game with children. I mean, look, I played a version of Snap with my 5-year-old granddaughter. You know, I got to go a bit slow, so she's right, but she'll get good at it eventually. They're also learning a lot of good social skills, taking turns, and also being a gracious winner, and also being able to take loss. I mean, you don't always win. It's not how it is, but it's that. And sometimes too, I think you can bring your siblings into place. So, you know, the younger or slightly old can be together. It's a bit like, say, when families go on like camping trips and so forth. That's often when they get the cards out. Well, I think it's been quite noticeable. We've had quite a real interest in, for example, Combo since this whole thing's come up. That's how come I know how much it is to post. That's the problem. And that's why we put those extra games up, so they've got a whole variety that they can play. Yeah, so how often was your question? I've been reminded. You know, look, if you played once or twice a week, I would have thought that's fair enough. I don't want to set for parents every night of the week doing something. They're busy. I mean, where you are, they come home through some serious traffic. You know, they're probably stressed by the time they get home. So 1 or 2 would be plenty, I would have thought, in a week. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Are there any final questions? No, I think
Right.
thanks again, Paul.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and your time with us. It's been so fantastic. Thank you, Leland, behind the scenes as well. Yeah, and all the students are saying thank you in the chat box as well. I'm sure they're going to take away lots from today.
Okay, no worries. And feel free to download what they like. So we're very happy for them. As I said, I wrote a lot of that stuff years ago. If it can be useful now, it's fine. I make one little point. There's one booklet I wrote. They're managing maths activity sessions, which is fairly recent, and it links to the Australian maths curriculum. The teacher I wrote it with died not a little while ago now from breast cancer. So my only comment there is you download that book and use it. Next time you see someone collecting money for breast cancer, put an extra couple of dollars in. Okay, so that's the only expectation. Okay, thanks very much, Colin.
Thanks,
So
Paul.
much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. All right,
Thank you,
bye.
Paul.
Thank you.
Later.